you. So I'll give everyone a chance to get seated here and we'll get started with our panel. I just want to introduce myself quickly, and I guess we can start with just introductions. We'll go here, Cary, and then we'll move on to you. Ebe bite webe tamake, ijaje wiwita te miakanda, te sinda wa ubli stasanda niashinga wa ubli umaha wa ubli. So I just wanted to introduce myself in my language, which is one of the many languages that are original to this land that we're on. I'm Umaha. I'm Buffalo Tail Clan from the Sky People. My Umaha name is Miakanda, and my English name is Marisa Cummings, and I currently serve as the president and CEO of the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jessica.
Bonjour, Jessica Gidagaakoons, Indigenous. Hello, my name is Jessica Gidagaakoons Smith. I'm a Two-Spirit band member of the Boys Fort Band of Minnesota Chippewa Tribe. I am a legal advocate and the MMIWR organizer for MN 350, and I'm also the coordinator for the MMIWR task force for New Mexico.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Greg LeBeau. Family from Cheyenne River in South Dakota and also from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. Other parts of my history. Primarily my history and work has been working with Native communities in behavioral health. So I was a mental health practitioner for 4 years, working with primarily youth, and currently doing a lot of work, especially within the last 3 years as well, doing a lot of advocacy and activism work throughout North Dakota and now Minnesota. So in some places throughout and internationally as well. So that's me, and it is nice to see everyone here today.
Thank you. And Cary.
Poso Sagoli, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sagoli Swagwake. Cary Waubanascum, Wapanoso Nyunget, Swaginyonta ni Wagitaloda, Otnyote Aga ni Wagahunjoda, Okale, Mmiw, Potawatomi, and Stockbridge. And I just spoke to you in the Oneida language. My name is Mmiw, so I'm a mixture of 4 different tribes here in Wisconsin, where I am right now on my ancestral homelands. And I am from the Turtle Clan, from our matrilineal society. And I join you. I miss Minnesota. I wish I could have been there. I lived there for 5 years. I'm a recent graduate at the University of Minnesota in the School of Social Work with my PhD, and now I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay in social work. But I join you today more as a relative because this topic has impacted my own family. And so, anything that I share with you will be, my intentions will be coming to you as a good relative. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cary. And I just wanted to acknowledge some content that was just talked about at the last panel. I think it's really important that we center all of these conversations in the fact that colonialism is the root cause of our disparities as the original people of this land. And I say that because it's so, it gets so overwhelming to talk about, and you could see by the previous panel, it was overwhelming to discuss some of these topics, but some of these topics are everyday life. And it is not because our people are deficient in any way. We were flourishing and well-functioning societies. And so I just want to reiterate that colonialism is the root cause of our disparities in our communities. So when we hear about those disparities, we should never feel shame. We should never feel that we're blamed for that. We are survivors of that. And so I just wanted to say that before going into our questions here for our panel. So I wanted to start with actually a quote from the MMIW task force report here in Minnesota. So the quote is, "The root cause of the MMIW injustice include colonization and historical trauma, racism, and sexual objectification of Indigenous women and girls. These root causes have led to increased systemic risk factors for experiencing violence and abuse among Indigenous women and girls, including poverty and lack of housing, involvement in the child welfare system and criminal justice system, being a victim of domestic violence, and being involved in prostitution and trafficking. So my question to the panel is, can you provide an example of an ideal transformative system change that will address the root causes of MMIR? And does anyone want to go first?
Are we starting anywhere?
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Well, I think to kind of address the question in a more, I think, generalized way, and also in a way where I've had my experience, I think, in this particular area, is that although my history of work has been under the behavioral health umbrella, along with that position comes a lot of exposure to different issues that you face and that your communities face. And so one of them had been issues regarding missing and murdered Indigenous people. And so my then role would be that another role I should say is the activist piece of part of me, the background that I have. And doing so, I worked with several different kind of projects that involve different issues that we face in Indian reservation, or sorry, Indian country. And so I think you see a lot of things that could happen, and you learn from these other issues that you can provide your level of your input and your level of expertise in a way where you learn from others, I think, in a way where their expertise can probably provide a better fix, I guess, or a better approach to how it is we can combat these issues. And so it's never been my expertise to be a person who I'd like to help find solutions, but it's always been my kind of superpower to work with others to find these collaborative ways to make a difference in these areas. And a lot of that is, I think what I bring to the table is the mental health piece of it, and knowing that we need to continue to find programs that are going to support individuals that are dealing with the systemic racism, the historical trauma, the stuff that people were so ashamed to talk about for so long that we sort of bury it down inside. And now we're seeing the effects, right, with different issues that we're facing now in the current. And so my job, I feel, and my superpower or my strength is to empower. And I've seen so many people here in this room today that I met that reflect that. And so we are the answer, I think, in short. We are the answer in how it is we're going to combat these issues. And we're going to continue to have a setting like this with people who know what it is they want to fight towards and what it is we can do in our individual superpower or super strengths, I think, that we can bring to the table. So
thank you, Greg. And that's really beautiful because it's rooted in Indigenous thought.
It is,
right?
Yes.
We don't ever talk about I or me, or I did this, I did that. You know, it's just not culturally appropriate. And so centering that work in the collective we is really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Do you want to go next, Jessica?
Sure. I think when I think of an ideal fix all, I mean, there's not really an ideal fix all. There's so many different aspects and different branches and different systems that all need decolonization. And when I think about my work that I do in the legal advocacy part of it, for Mmiw families, and then also children that are affected by child abuse. I see a lot of racism embedded into the legal system, embedded into our judges, embedded into the lawyers. And to me, it takes an Indigenous person to be in that space, to take up space, to make noise, to say, hey, I'm here, this is not okay. And even that is not enough. As we just said, you know, it can't be just one person, it has to be a collective voice. I have currently working with a case that involves 10 Native children that are being abused in foster care. And the county, the courthouse, all of the county workers, social workers are all trying to put these children back into these abusive homes. And with picture, video evidence, and all of this stuff that's been going on for years and years. And the county is trying to put them back. So we're stuck in a spot where, as a community, we are trying to protect our children and keep our children safe from abusers, but in reality, the system is the main abuser. And they perpetrate the violence against our people, and they have been doing that since colonization. So it also lies within the hands of our tribal leaders and our tribal governments, because in this case with these children, the MCT has refused to step up for the descendants. So ICWA does not apply to 3 of the children because they're not enrolled. They refuse to step up for the children. And seeing that is, it's heartbreaking, and it's written into our Constitution to protect the welfare of ourselves and our descendants. So to see our tribal leadership and our tribal government giving up on our people and not protecting our descendants is actively participating in our genocide as a people. There's a post on Facebook that was recently going around with the numbers of enrollees in every tribe in Minnesota. And to see such low numbers is, I can't put a word to how deep that hurts my heart, because we have the power as tribal nations and tribal leaders and communities to decolonize our own tribes. We do not have to go off government blood quantum. Natives are the only people that have to prove their blood quantum next to horses and dogs. And our tribal leadership needs to be stepping up to change that, because otherwise these numbers are going to keep declining and declining, and we're not going to have any more enrolled members to carry on our traditions and carry on our legacies. And I actively take a part in holding government officials at a state level, federal level, and a tribal level accountable for their negligence to protect the people that they are supposed to be protecting. All police officers, judges, social workers, everybody, tribal leadership has a job that they are supposed to be doing that they are not doing. And they are failing each and every one of our people. And they are partially, mainly to blame for a lot of our missing and murdered Indigenous people. So it's really holding people in power accountable.
Thank you. Cary, do you need me to reread the question? Okay.
I just have the ideal system. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now. Yep, an ideal transformative system change
Okay.
that will address root causes of
Okay,
Mmiw.
so I agree with what my fellow panelists said, and I just want to go along with what Jessica was just saying about, our ideal systems. And I think each community, there's an ideal for each community that we live in. I mean, I went from Minnesota to now home, well, a few homes here, different communities, and we each have our own ideal. But one of the common threads I see is that we have a responsibility to recognize how deeply colonization has infiltrated our communities. There's forms of colonization and colonial violence that we can easily see, but then there's other forms that are hidden and more insidious. And speaking as a social worker, I was a social worker in my communities for 10 years before moving out to Minnesota to further my education. I ran into this article about 5 years ago, written by a Cree scholar named Michael Hart. And the title is, "Am I a Modern Day Missionary?" And talking about how we are self-colonizing. We are committing a genocide onto ourselves now, and what Jessica was saying exactly about blood quantum. And I'm going through it myself. I have 2 children, and one's enrolled, one's not. My daughter has many friends who are many different tribes and are to both parents, maybe they're native, just like in my family, and the child can't be enrolled, and that's traumatizing. My own tribe is traumatizing me and my family. And so our ideal systems, I don't know what that, I don't have an answer to that, but what we need to do is recognize how colonization has been so deeply ingrained into us, and then we need to undo it. And I always say the responsibility and the burden is on us. When I went back to school, you know, I didn't just learn, I unlearned a lot. The more that I learned about colonization, I unlearned. For me personally, I unlearned a lot of it, and I changed a lot of it in the realm in the circle for which I have power to change. I changed it, and I also learned a lot from a lot of people, from a lot of different people in Minnesota, people that I've met, and I'd like to say, Poso, Lisa, I see you. I heard your beautiful voice in the crowd. Lisa's one of them who taught me a lot. Just listening to her, observing her, being in the same room as her, and carrying those teachings from the many different people that I come across who are being good relatives, who are making changes in the system, contesting that colonization, identifying it, and making those changes, and then forcing those changes in the bigger systems that we have to live under, those colonial systems that continue to perpetrate colonial violence onto us. That's what my research came to be about, talking to our relatives who are caretakers, not only caretakers of children in our homes, but caretakers to our relatives. You know, how many of you in your language have a word that say we are all related, right? I do. We're all related. So, you know, even talking to those relatives who are educators, who are making those changes, you know, trying to take care of so the next generation of children don't have to experience historical or intergenerational trauma. So, you know, in a nutshell, what I would have to say is that we just need to keep doing this work. The responsibility is on us. You know, I'm not going to sit around and wait for the child welfare system to make a change, because they're the ones who are continuing to perpetrate the violence onto us with their child removal system. I have more to say about that, but I think we'll cover that in another question.
Absolutely. I always think that it's easy for us to identify those injustices that exist within systems. It's easy for us to see where things are going wrong. What I love hearing is, especially this younger generation, visioning what transformative change looks like. Because if we can vision what we want it to look like, we can get there. And so I think that's really kind of the heart of that question, was for us to really think about that. What do we want this world to look like, and how do we get there? So the second question actually feeds off of exactly what you were saying, Cary. Colonial structures and systems did not provide adequate culturally responsive healing resources for Indigenous victims and survivors, families, and communities. How do you see culturally responsive healing resources being sustained through systemic funding mechanisms? And what would this look like? So we all know that we need culturally specific healing resources, but what would that look like if it was actually sustainable through these systems? Because to me, that's system work. So does anyone want to start? You want to start, Jessica?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, what does that look like? I think, you know, a lot of that has to come from our own tribal leadership. You know, we look at our reservations and our tribes. We don't have domestic violence shelters on our reservations. Mm-hmm. We don't have places where trafficking victims can go to get the help or the treatment that they need. We don't have shelters, emergency shelters for Native children. so I think, you know, all of those things need to be at priority list for restructuring not only tribal government, but community as a whole. You know, I have so many different people that I know and things that I've even experienced and gone through myself. And people can't turn to their own tribe, their own tribal leadership to get the help that they need and that they deserve. It's a shame. And I think that we should not be relying on the US government to create these healing spaces for us, when we should be creating these healing spaces for ourselves, for our own people. And I've done little things. I'm in a tribal administration and governance master's program right now. And I was looking at different studies of like what different programs have been looked at or implemented within different tribes and resource allocation. And there's just not enough resource allocation for crime victims. And I think that needs to be at a higher priority. Our tribes, you know, say, oh, you know, we care about our people, we care about our people. And at the end of the day, you know, they don't, they turn their backs on us. And I think that's something that definitely highly needs to change. So tribal elections are coming up. Keep that in mind.
And so are state elections. So many of us live in urban areas, right? Over 70% of us actually live in urban areas and are dual citizens. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because when we look at these funding mechanisms, if it comes through the Indian Health Service, you know, we're sicker now than we ever have been. And so this IHS system isn't working. So what if we think about like ideally what that would look like, you know, somebody somewhere needs to start funding our traditional healing practices, right? Because we know that's what works in mental health, behavioral health, chemical dependency, that's what works for us. And so that's why I threw that out there. But would you like to speak to behavioral health at all, Greg?
I do, yeah. So one of the things I was thinking of just now as we were going through that was the when you spoke of the IHS system and how it is that we are able to provide services and who pays for that. Well, naturally, when you work for the IHS, when you work with IHS, it's sort of embedded that we still kind of follow this sort of westernized kind of way of providing services, right? And so what I learned was, and what I was so fortunate to have been exposed to, or with mentors in my life, was that we're going to start doing. We have to be very visual and very also accepting to the fact that we're working with a population that not only we grew up in, but also that there are very different times that we're looking at now. We've, like you said, we have the highest health disparities, and that includes mental health and behavioral health. And so one of the things I believe in so strongly is holistic approaches to therapy and any type of medicine that's not so westernized. We still are in a position where we still have to recognize that there are westernized things that we have to interact with. However, we have never been a culture that has depended on it previously. So what we know is that there's a way that we provide services in a way that's going to be relative, but also having practitioners that are a part of a community that we know is suffering. And so I think back to kind of how it is that we're going to combat, I think, providing holistic approaches and culturalized approaches and indigenized approaches to any kind of health issues is that we need to go back to our tribal leadership. We need to recognize and start having a voice. I'm always about empowerment, obviously, because of the work I've done, but you see it a lot, I think, in behavioral health. And my career as a social worker in general has seen all these different health disparities, primarily with mental health, that we have a history with because we have this historical trauma piece. And so we really need to start recognizing who it is our leaders are, what the push is, and who as a community is going to put that push to our community leaders to ensure that we're that we're locking in funding resources that are going to primarily help us to provide holistic approaches to medical and mental health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Cary, do you want to answer the question?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've been saying lately, and as I transitioned over to another colonial academic institution, is that our people are the first of everything on these lands. We are the first knowers, the first scientists, the first doctors, the first helpers. As I'm a social worker, we are the first at everything. We had the first government structures. Do you think the colonizer came over here knowing about democracy? No, absolutely not. They had to learn our land. We are the first teachers. And so I'm gonna bring my late auntie to this space here. Her name was Gertrude Hill, and she lived in a little house on the Menominee Indian Reservation. And you go into this little community called Hawpetos, Wisconsin. And to the right, there was a little yellow house that was hers. She had a little outdoor stove. And my grandpa's house was the second house on the right. And that's where I grew up. It was the safest, most beautiful place on the face of this earth for many of us. So anybody who says anything bad about the reservation, I have some words for you. My Aunt Gert, she was a scientist. She had a little long gray braid, but she knew everything about our plant medicines. Everything. She was surrounded by our beautiful Menominee forest, and she knew everything about it. But that knowledge went back to the Creator's world with her. It did, before she could pass it on to any of us. And so thank you, Marisa, for asking us to be visionary, because a vision of mine would be to recognize and acknowledge that science of ours and to preserve it somehow, to reclaim it, because the other side of what decolonization is reclaiming, right? Identifying where colonization has infiltrated our lives, but also reclaiming our knowledge. And so, and I'm not ever going to say we need to do away with Western science, okay? Because yeah, I go to the doctor, I always make a joke, like I'm chemically treated for COVID. I got the vaccine, yeah, I did. But don't ever tell me that my auntie's knowledge was less than when it was the first knowledge here. Okay. And so that would be my vision. Okay. One vision. There's more, but my Aunt Gert came into my heart when we're talking about this. And so I had to bring her here. And I know she's listening to me. She's looking down upon us as we're talking about this. But yeah, that's my response to that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I always say, like, we have our elders that have PhDs, right? We have 10-year-olds that could have PhD, the equivalent of a PhD, their knowledge, their understanding, and their cultural base. And that's just not given the same validation as letters behind a name, right? But when we go home, we know our families don't care about our masters, PhDs, like they could care less about that. How are you a good relative? How are you helping your mom cook? Are you showing up for doings? Those are the things that that we're looked at and judged on. So thank you for sharing that and sharing your auntie with us too. And you're wearing a yellow shirt. Now I'm going to think of yellow every time I see you. Yellow house, yellow shirt. All right, so the third question is, what role does systemic racism play in preventing equity in systems such as law enforcement, the judicial system, and child protection services? And I wanted to kind of bring forward, when we talk about equity, right? Like we just heard stats in the last panel about, well, you're less than 1% of the population. The numbers are so low. Doesn't that mean we need the most money and resources? Mm-hmm. Isn't that what that means? Right? Like that's equity, right? So just something to think about. But if, again, what role does systemic racism play in preventing equity in those systems? And I'm just going to say something at Cary while you were talking that entered my head. I've been a foster parent. And I was thinking, what would happen if the parents got the money that foster parents get to take care of kids
Yeah.
for prevention and intervention, right? And it really kind of wore on me because I felt guilt with that. Wondering if that could make a difference. So that's just one thing that I'm thinking of in terms of equity, and also trusting Indian people, right? With money and power. But I'll let you start, Jessica.
Yeah, like just to start off by backing off in what you just said, like with what would happen if you took the money and gave it to the parent, like in the case that I'm working with now, like the case that I'm working with and advocating for now with these 10 Native children, the biological parents of these children are sober, and they've been sober for 10 years. One of them has been, and the county and the system is trying very, very, very hard to keep them in their foster care, but it turned into a permanency. So that's a whole nother legal issue. But systemic racism is embedded into all of these systems, in the legal system, the foster care system, all of it. And, you know, if you look at the foster care system and how that contributes to our missing and murdered, you know, when somebody in foster care goes missing, nobody looks for them. Nobody cares about them. So we have to find ways to, you know, not only infiltrate these systems. I believe, you know, we should have Native people that are in these systems actively working to decolonize from within, but also having people working to decolonize from the outside. Yeah, you have to take a multi-tiered approach to it and combat it from every angle. I think with law enforcement specifically, the personal experience that I have with law enforcement, their negligence and their racism. I have a case right now, Ricky Balsamo, who I'm wearing. His family had to hire their own private investigator to find him. They went to St. Paul Police, they went to Duluth Police, they went to Superior, Wisconsin Police. None of those agencies would help his family. So now, even now, after they had discovered, they hired their own private investigator, they solved their own son's murder. He was cut up into pieces and put in cement buckets and thrown into Lake Superior. Even now with the justice system, his family is still being actively violated and not being treated right, and not, you know, because Ricky had a record. So there's that racial bias, and that oh, he went to prison before, so he doesn't matter. That type of mindset is embedded into our legal system. And because of our historical trauma, you know, our people are more historically obviously put into prison for lesser things. Ricky was only 18 when he went to federal prison for a drug charge. His first charge, he went to federal prison for 12 years. So there's so many different pieces of it that are really deeply embedded into racism. And I don't know what that looks like. How do we get rid of that? You know, like, what does it take to get through to somebody or to an agency to get the help that they deserve? Ricky's family did not deserve to have to find their own son. And they're still actively being treated less than by the courts. So I think having people that will combat these systems and, you know, call them out on their BS, you know, that's what I do. I'll show up straight up to the police department with the bullhorn, yelling out the investigators. And I've done that in Ramsey County. So, you know, there's so many people who come at things from different directions. And for me, it's really trying to hold people accountable for their negligence and their racism and their embedded colonialism, and ways to try to decolonize and provide equality and equity and diversity and all of that. You know, all of our people matter, and especially our men. You know, our men are sacred. And I think within the MMIWR movement, a lot of times our men are overlooked. And I hope to see that change. I really do. I think that all of our people matter, man, woman, child, two-spirit. We all matter. We all deserve to be treated with equal respect and honor. And if one of us goes missing, we all deserve to be looked for equally by all systems. Lyssa Yellowbird Chase cannot look for us all. Maybe she can, but yeah, it's a lot. It really is. And it's something that, you know, I deal with every single day, the embedded racism in all of these systems. And I really try to be as loud as I can about it, and not sit back and let, you know, these police officers get away with saying things like, the police told Ricky's family, bring us a body and we'll open a case. So it's those types of things that desperately need to change. And I think that community awareness and community outrage and holding these people accountable is something that definitely desperately needs to happen. And it can't be just one person. It has to be a collective community effort. Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, so in thinking about this one, I do believe that it is embedded. But when we think about the histories of what it is, I think that Indigenous people had been exposed to. When we think about before the Indian Child Welfare Act, when we think about before we had our own tribal laws and all these different things that we now have, previous to that, we had already been exposed to a large amount of historical trauma and traumas in general that only built and got different and sort of evolved as we moved along on this earth with the colonialism. And so what I think of are different things that kind of played a factor in that, such as Catholicism, religion that wasn't part of our spirituality, boarding schools, all these different things that we didn't choose to be a part of, right? And so I believe that that is sort of where we started from in a respect of talking about systemic racism and issues that are attached to that. And so we are living now in a world where still we have all of us here today who identify and understand one of the issues, or maybe many of them that we're talking about today, that are attached to just being individuals that were vulnerable to be missing and or murdered and or degraded and or discriminated. All of these issues that we face, that we fight against and combat and get together and combat against. And so I believe that it's always been there. And now we have our own tribal laws and our own child welfare and our own social services and our own schools and all these different things. However, we just found not long ago, if we really think about it, even if we're talking 40 years ago, we still had books that were not our teachings, that were not culturally appropriate for us, and we were still learning the wrong histories about our people, or the lack thereof. It was never mentioned. And so when I think of it, I really believe that now what we're doing as a collective today in this room, we have not only women, not only men, not only straight people, not only gay people, not only, we have dogs in here today even.
How Indian of us.
How Indian of us. But we're talking about equality, right? We're talking about that piece that is the drive from what we experienced from all these different issues that we face due to colonialism, basically, and that movement, and feeling hopeless and helpless, and not even knowing that we are being discriminated in our own backyard, no less. And so I think that, yes, it's always been there, but what we're doing as a collective is we're coming together like this room today, and we're talking about it, having the conversation. Somebody talked about shame earlier, and the issues that we faced, and not being able to talk about it. And now we are. And I think that that's how we're going to change those things. I know it seems simple, and there's not a simple answer. There really isn't. But really the simplicity of being able to have a conversation, having people listen, having people disagree, not wanting to hear sometimes what we believe to be true, but we're here and we're having that conversation. And I really do believe that that's the empowerment that people feel for the push for us to go and talk to our leaders, talk to each other. We're not segregated or have subcategories of people anymore. That's not what Indigenous people are. It's not who we are. We believe that we are a collective, and that we're not just one area of issues has one group of people that we're concerned about. No, we're all here today talking about the same issue. And I really don't believe in labels and all that kind of thing at all. I have a whole other thing I could probably go off about that.
Same.
Yeah, because we are a collective, like I said. But no, I think that that's what's going to be the resolve. It takes some time. It's going to take a long time. But the more we have these conversations in a room like this and in a space like this, the more change is going to slowly come. And who knows, maybe it could come even faster. But that's where that change in the systemic racism and et cetera, that we're talking about in these different systems, child welfare systems, mental health, law enforcement, even in our own tribal governments, we're going to be able to make those changes because we have the say, not just the leadership. We tell them what it is we need, and we push for them to make that change as well. We utilize these people that are that have these roles that come with a lot of responsibility, and we utilize that by having a voice. And I think that's what we're doing here today. So I think that's where the change is going to come from.
Yes, and I just so agree, because everything you're talking about is service-based leadership.
Yes.
Because that's what's Indigenous, that's what's natural to us, is service-based leadership.
Right.
And this colonial model is based on the individual. And what we're doing is like reflipping that. And we know it exists because most of us have IRA constitutions with our tribes, right, that were imposed upon us. And that's when things started to go wrong. And now we're talking about, well, how do we reclaim our culture in our tribal government? What's our original governance structure? What were the people in our communities called that went out and were essentially our social workers? What were the people that were our Wanashe, our protectors? Those are the types of things we're starting to think about now. And the MTAG program, I'm going to give it a thumbs up right now. So I'm a graduate too. And I know Jamie and I took a class together, because you get these incredible Native thought leaders together. And that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about transformative change. And so thank you for all of that. I think we could probably talk for hours. I'm also thinking of Paulo Freil's book and how he talks about real education will happen by discussion, right? And that's how we're really going to learn and grow and real change happens. So on the last question, before we open it up for audience questions, I want to ask Cary, because I know this is one that that we had talked about, and I know you have an answer for this one. Can you speak to the role of the child welfare system as a pipeline to further exploiting Native children?
Yeah, I was really critical of the child welfare system in my work when I was at the University of Minnesota. I I went into the work and I was working with Dr. Priscilla Day. We have some publications out there on her, and I'm going to put a plug out there too for the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies up at UMD. And we did 3 papers on that with her, and she taught me a lot about systems change, but contextualizing it within as a system of colonization and a system that perpetuates colonial violence today. I had to take a step back and look at, well, what do we mean by colonization? What does that mean? And so I was so fortunate that my committee was, I always say, half Indigenous women who knew exactly where I was coming from, where I wanted to go, and could guide me. And so helped me define colonization based on what I was talking about. And so what I got is that, and many of us know this, is that colonization was, it's the elimination of all forms of our life, the elimination of Native life, society, our knowledge, our systems to be replaced with Western colonized systems. And they did this, they racialized us. Yes, racism is a big thing in there. You know, the human versus inhuman, okay, the superior versus the inferior based on racial characteristics, based on biological characteristics. But equally as imposed upon us was this gender system, which Maria Lugones calls the modern colonial gender system. So she says that just as equally as race, this gender system was also imposed. And you see that through different policies throughout history. Boarding school, you know, the gender roles that they forced us into. And then throughout other policies, such as the Dawes Allotment Act, where they brought in people to train us, the men to go out and farm, the women to do, you know, the household things. And so they imposed that upon us, thereby erasing our definitions, our ways of being in terms of being a human or the first people. I don't even want to say gender. My son, who is two-spirit transgender, who's 20, has taught me a lot about gender because he resists the modern colonial gender system. He has resisted since he was little, since he was sent to me from the Creator as a gift. And as far as the child welfare system and you know, contextualizing this within the child welfare system, so these like these racism and gender being this dichotomous system, this hierarchical systems, these labels that they put on us and these roles that they forced us into, they did this to justify violence onto us. They justified violence onto us for the pursuit of our lands. We know this, okay? And they did this, social workers, my profession, okay, get this. I'm gonna tell you some history here. In the late 1800s, we have boarding schools going on, we have the Dawes Allotment Act going on, but we also have the emergence of social work as a profession. One of the first missionaries, who was also considered a social worker, to call for the professional education of social work was the daughter of none other than the Senator Henry Dawes. And she was also a close collaborator with Captain Pratt. We all know who that is, right? And so social work was very up in the mix with colonization. And social workers are, you know, I'm not saying we're the only ones who are in child welfare, but we do, you know, we're big time into child welfare. We set policy, we train people, but the colonial systems, not only child welfare, they've always had removal on their minds in order to destroy us, to colonize us, to justify violence. The removal has been always on their mind. And so that's what their system is made up of. Whether it was removal from our mother earth, our lands, to removal from the mothers who gave birth to us. Removal has always been their tactic. Okay, and so boarding schools, we saw it, that forced abduction to the carceral boarding school system, to policies such as the Indian adoption projects, or what in Canada they call it the 60s scoop, and now into the modern child welfare system. It just morphed and we call it something different now. And so we need to recognize that. And we need to do something about it. And there are a lot of communities doing things about it. And I mentioned Priscilla Day, who taught me a lot. She's one of my mentors, and you know, with the work that she's done, and now she's, you know, she's says she's retired, but I don't believe she is retired. But you know, all of that work that we do on a daily basis, we need to keep doing that. But we also need to recognize that ongoing colonial violence it exists, but it just looks a little bit different now today. And then how can we envision? So thank you again, Marisa, for getting us into this visionary mindset, but we need to think about that. You know, what do we do? Like, and Lisa, can I bring your name up again too? You taught me a very important teaching. We don't heal separately, we heal together. Right? So I got to acknowledge you on that, because that was a very profound teaching. And I'll stop talking now, but that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you, Cary. We'll open it up for questions. It's been a long, emotional day. A good day, but it's heavy. So, well, we'll go ahead. Is there any last remarks anyone would like to make, or should we close out?
Defund CPS.
Reallocate.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to ask Grandmother Mary Lyons to come up and give our closing prayer, and then we will welcome Lyz to the stage, and she'll be doing a song for us. So thank you all. We will hawangli.
We're going to do an exercise. Everybody stand up.
I think I'm gonna go down off the stage.
I know I'm done.
Where's the mic? Is that working? Can you guys hear me? Oh, God. Hello. As a great grandmother, I want to see how well you guys are listening and paying attention. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, you two on the floor. Hello, hello, hello. Elder in the house, come on. You just got done saying you were traditional. Come on. Calling you guys out. I want to see how well you listened. Today was a real good day. You know, I've been at this, what they say, the Mmiw for 42 years. So we're going to do this exercise, and I'm going to start it off. I'm going to point it to the first row. We're going to go down, and then you're going to go back. We're going to go zigzag all the way to the top. Okay? I'll step out there. Take a deep breath. Let it out. Take your hand, kind of turn around. Wiggle. Got that going? Now I want you to use everything in you of loving and kindness, and one of my favorite characters is our friend, and his name is Joey. So when I say this to you, you're going to say it with good expressions to the next. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing?
How are you doing?
How you doing? How you doing? How you doing?
How you doing?
How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How usual.
Hey, there's my girl.
How you doing?
Okay, you can all have a seat. I think one of the things is when you get into circle, myself being a great grandmother and I'm a day one, is that what you spoke of, I lived through. I lived through a community that was healthy, well. We didn't have grocery stores. Our grocery stores were our brothers, uncles, grandpas going out hunting. We never stored anything, we shared. We never had telephones, we never had lights, we never had gas, we never had all the amenities that people got lazy with. And with this laziness comes the hardship of what we're talking about today. You see in our tribal territories that we had, when we talk about land acknowledgement and of the land, it's in us because you see in our creation story, is that we believe we come from the stars. And we enter as a spirit after having that original agreement with Creator. And we swim in the pools, the oceans, the waters within our mother's womb for up to 9 months while she builds this beautiful blanket around us. And we all knew everything carries memory, even the water. While we were taking on this form of this body, this blanket, we were downloaded with everything of all the memories our ancestors that walked before us here on this planet we call Mother Earth. It's in us. That's why we say our ancestors are in us and all around us. So when we swam in those waters and got downloaded, just like your computers, right? Then you start to enter this world. And then what do? You take that first breath. Air. Then we feel the warmth, we feel the fire. And then we nourish and we plant our feet on Mother Earth. You see, those are only 4 elements. And we all depend on it. Everything on this planet. Trees, the birds, the fish, everything. You see, mankind developed this thing to conquer and divide and greed. And they made this separation. Because those 4 elements we all depend on, that's what makes us the oneness. You see, within that agreement, we were to come as caretakers. We were put in parts of this planet as original gardeners. We were to know the plant life. We were to know the air. So we could harvest the seeds and to start producing those future gardeners and those knowledge keepers to continue with what was given to us from the beginning of time until we leave this time. You see, we can't stand in anybody else's space. We weren't brought here to judge. We weren't brought here to hate. That's because we were given these seven teachings. Before you could speak and talk towards another, you must live and cherish and know those meanings of those 7 teachings of that prayer I read this morning. Does that make sense? You see, within that kindness, we can harbor and carry that anger. But the thing is, we have to ask one another, is that your anger or anger of somebody else's that wasn't meant for you to carry? You see, here's the thing is, I was taught a lesson by my great-granddaughter. I was mad one day, but you know what? First of all, when I was younger, in our community, we never used the word white people, black people. We never made the descriptions of color about people. It was always relative. You see, we didn't invite that into our communities because it was a darkness. Not like they do today. We even do it to our own people. Well, anyway, through time, as myself being through the Removal Act, all the way up until now, is that I developed an anger. And I adapted that word, oh, those white people. I use that to blame. That was my pointing finger. That was my excuse for my laziness. I was too busy being in somebody else's space instead of my own. Until one day I said that word. And my great-granddaughter was sitting there and she put her head down. She looked real sad. And I looked at her and I said, my girl, what's the matter? She said, Kokum, you only love part of me. You see, our children today are not as I am. There's nothing more in me other than Anishinaabe blood. My father, my grandfather, my mother, my grandmothers and this stuff, that's it. And as that blood thinned to my great-granddaughter, she's of many tribal nations. She's Black and she's Caucasian. So when we speak of our frustrations, be extremely careful because our future seeds are going to be the beauty or the destruction of what we teach them. You see, it's hate destroyed us. Don't let hate destroy our children. Because if we forget to pass on those teachings of being a good gardener, they're going to cease to no longer be no more. You see, you can't take the spirit out of a blanket that has many colors. You cannot say that this grandparent that lived hundreds of years ago is better than that grandparent. I hope that makes sense. But the thing is, when we talk about discrimination, the loss of people, and this is to the non-Indigenous people here. You know what is happening to us? Your people didn't escape it either. It happened to your people in Europe, Asia, because you wouldn't be here if your ancestors didn't try to escape to save you. You see, we cannot take the responsibility and an ownership of such hate. Because if we do, we will never be that oneness again. So the thing is, we must move forward. And we must move forward with those 7 teachings in order to survive. There is hardly any of us elders left anymore that have those original teachings. You may know it, but you may not feel it. You may act it whenever it feels appropriate. But the thing is, to be who we are is from the time you entered this planet until the time you leave it. Every breath is sacred. Treasure it. And I admire you, and I want you to applaud yourself for doing that very uncomfortable exercise of my Joey. So I want to invite Lyz up. So I want to say also to, and I'm always calling Nicole her mother, Lynette. But, you know, it's such an honor to see you young people. We're either forcing our way at the justice table, but what I'm seeing you young people doing is you're creating and building your own justice table and inviting them to ours. So I want to say chimi gwitch to everyone here. Lyz, take it away, my girl. Bring it home.
I'm a little short. Miigwech, welcome. So, Bojo Nindo Magani Duk Nitana Gamo Quain Indigenous Magazine Nindo Dem. Nagajiwanong Nindonjaba. I am feeling very honored to help you close your day. I'm from Fond du Lac Reservation, and my mom spent her entire life working for our community, and my grandma the same. My mom was a social worker. My grandma was the first CHR at Fond du Lac, and her mother was one of the nurses at the Indian hospital to help deliver the babies before the hospital got moved off the res. But I'm the black sheep, and I became a teacher, working in a different way. And I carry some songs, and I'm humbled to be asked for occasions like this. And I wasn't sure which songs to sing, or somebody said one song. So I had an idea coming here, and I'm not sure. So I think maybe we'll do two songs if that's okay with you. We'll do that Women's Warrior song that was kind of requested. So we'll do that one, and that calls on you to use your voices. And I was happy to hear Grandma talk about that moment, you know, when we were first born and we take that first breath, because shortly after that, we use our voice. And as babies, when we first enter here, we take that breath and we use our voice without thinking about what other people are going to think about it. We use it because it's a human expression. It's a human right. It's a part of our being to use that sound. And the family waits, and they're so excited when they hear that voice, right? We're all happy, relieved when that baby cries. And that love is shown back to us. So for those of you who don't consider yourself singers, I want you to think again. Because we're born singers. So we'll sing that Women's Warrior song, and then we'll close it out with the traveling song to try and do things in a good way. I want to say how proud I am. I got here late, but just watching what happened up here, the conversations that were happening, and to know that this is happening here on this campus where I'm currently pursuing a PhD in ethnomusicology, but I've also gone here at other incarnations of my education, and being an Indigenous woman, a survivor, coming to school here hasn't always been welcoming. But when I walked up here and I was like, this is where we are. And yes, we're making the tables. We're setting the tables. We're speaking at the tables. We are doing what our grandparents began before we were all interrupted with colonization. We're taking our roles back. So we're going to sing this Women's Warrior song. It's not really that hard. We'll sing through it 7 times because it's short, all right? Usually we do 4, but 7's a good number too, isn't it?
Yaki
The traveling song that we most commonly hear was given to the people by Alex Skeed. I learned this from Gidagaakoons, and the translation is, it is because of you that I am walking. And I think that carries particular meaning for everybody in a different way, but definitely in this room. Mmiw.